We wanted to find out what students want from a career, what concerns they have, and how they want to engage with employers. I don't really need to go into the problem. You all know the problem, but there's some fairly shocking stats that you might not have come across before. The first one, lack of employer-student contact from age 13 to 18. Over 50% of all 13 to 18-year-olds have zero meaningful interactions with an employer every year they're at school. Zero. Less than 1 in 5 students is happy with the careers advice they get in relation to STEM. And as you know, this leads to the shortfall. This means that most school leavers leave school with poor knowledge of the STEM careers that are available to them, and even less contact with the employers yourselves that are so desperate to recruit them. Lord Baker's mentioned the stats, 40,000 shortfall annually of STEM graduates, shortage of 173,000 skilled workers in the sector, and altogether this costs you £1.5 billion in additional recruitment costs through inflated salaries, hiring at lower levels, using temporary staffing solutions, etc. So I mentioned the report. So we surveyed 1,500 secondary school students, a representative sample of the UK, and we really wanted to find out the answers to these questions. So what do students want from you? What proportion of students aspire to a career in STEM? It's not as bad as you think. What are the causes of the gender imbalance? There's been a lot of research into this, but we wanted to understand it a bit better. How you should start engaging with future STEM talent to attract them to the workplace, and what's the best way to build your own STEM talent pipeline. So we'll kick off with that industry piece. So we asked students, do you know what industry you want to work in when you finish education? As you can see here, the graph's pretty much flat across the 3 key stages. So from the start of secondary school through to the end, roughly 3/4 already know what industry they want to work in. Now we sort of tried to understand why this might be, and we took 2 sort of takeaways from this. One is engage early. So if you want to influence students' subject choices, it has to start at Key Stage 3. The second, if you're a pessimist, would be that school careers advice is not working. It's not increasing the number of students that know what industry they want to do at Key Stages 4 and 5. If you're an optimist, as an employer, you might say there's still 25% of students we can convince at Key Stage 5 to come and work in our industry. So the big one, do students actually want a career in STEM? Luckily, the answer appears to be yes. I mentioned 7 out of 10 students. So 70% of students said they would consider STEM. Lord Baker obviously mentioned UTCs, and it's worth pointing out, UTCs were part of the sample. They're much higher, as you'd expect. 90% of students at UTCs are looking to go into a STEM industry. But within mainstream, you're still looking at roughly 65% of students saying they're considering STEM. What about the hard to recruit groups? So I think about half the people in the room asked about young women on the question before the event. The graph on the right shows that. So purple is young men, red young women. Female is lower and quite noticeably as you would expect. Roughly 50%. So by Key Stage 3, at that stage, 11 to 14-year-olds, nearly 50% are already saying they're not considering STEM. If you want to make an impact, it has to start at that age. Another thing that you can see is the increase in both the graphs across Key Stage 4 and 5. Now, we don't have all the answers to this. It's just thrown out sort of hypotheses, but we think this might be because the impact activities, the outreach that you're doing, tends to fall later during the school journey. So is that why it increases for both boys and girls? If we look at BAME, it's, as you'd expect, a higher proportion that are considering STEM as opposed to non-BAME. There's been quite a lot of research into this, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but one aspect might be that the cultural differences of placing a higher societal sort of value on engineers and scientists in a lot of BAME cultures. So we asked all the students that said, I'm not looking at STEM, why not? 40% roughly said, I'm just not interested. That's the purple graph, the purple line there. But that 40%, you can see it increasing with age. One of the orange lines here, not interested, but actually, we then ask them what career they want to go into, and it is STEM. It requires STEM talent. So nearly over 30% of Key Stage 3 students said, I'm not interested in STEM, but I want to be a pilot, I want to be a games developer. That to us showed there's not enough advice here. Students don't understand what STEM is, what skills they need to be successful within STEM. Lack of ability. A little bit of a depressing sort of thing that came out of our research was the lack of ability, lack of confidence amongst students across the spectrum. Lack of ability for why not STEM. This increases over the exam years, as you'd expect. So the pink line here, you can see it pretty much doubles. So when you're taking exams, it becomes much more of a concern. So that probably, from your perspective, means students are requiring support at that point to ensure they can see the pathway and people that are like them, that have achieved similar grades, that have been successful. Not enough information for 10% of these students. And unfortunately, young women are twice as likely to cite lack of ability as the reason for not pursuing STEM. So what are the actual specific concerns that students have? So we asked, what do you believe is the biggest barrier to get in your job, the job that you said you want to go into? The largest at all three key stages, lack of relevant experience. Not surprising when you think these are students, of course, they won't have a lot of experience, but they cite that as the biggest challenge, the biggest concern they have. Look at the purple bar there, lack of career information and knowledge, key stage 3, massive. Lack of network and contacts. We asked students, how many professional contacts do you believe you have? What was the average? A couple of guesses?
1,
2. 2 or fewer, on average, students felt they had. And these are including Key Stage 5 students. Lack of opportunities to interact with employers. Lack of qualifications is an obvious one, of course. Concerningly, again, gender, the biggest barrier. 7% of girls put gender as the biggest barrier to achieving their career. Ethnicity and background, again, for some students as well. If you add up lack of relevant experience, opportunities to interact with employers, lack of network and contacts, 70% of students' concerns could be addressed by actions that employers take. So looking at work experience, it's always challenging offering comprehensive work experience as employers, we know that, but 40% of students said it's either impossible or very difficult to find work experience. 40% of all students. 4 out of 5 said work experience was or would be useful though. So we then asked, what stopped you? Why didn't you get work experience? No support from the school. Key stage 4, 45% of students saying our school did not support us finding work experience. 30% at key stage 5. Concerningly, 20% of students saying at key stage 4, I didn't know I could do work experience while I'm at school. Lack of connections. So if you look at the key stage 5, so the students that are about to leave school, 30% saying lack of connections is the reason they can't find work experience. Why don't they have a network of contacts, professional contacts from an earlier age to make it easier to find work experience? Again, going back to that confidence point. So students are really unsure about reaching out to an employer. We go out to schools every week and we see the same thing. It's different in UTCs, which I won't go into. Lord Baker's sang their praises enough, but in UTCs, they're so professional. They come up to you, they shake your hand. In the mainstream schools we go into, they're really scared of even asking a basic question to an employer. We think this again can be solved by an earlier engagement. Get that ingrained into students that it's okay to ask adults and professionals questions. What concerns do you have about apprenticeships? So those students that said, I want to go into an apprenticeship, 30% of them said they have a concern. Largest by far, getting a place in an apprenticeship. Maybe unsurprising, but maybe more surprising, 16% saying how enjoyable the apprenticeship will be. That's their biggest concern about an apprenticeship. 11% saying the value of it. So are you showing the progression that can happen from your apprenticeships? What's the pathway, the career pathway within your organisation? Something that we found a bit interesting, not having a uni life, something that a lot of employers say, think students are going to be really concerned about. Only 6% actually say that's the biggest concern. 8% saying salary, again, fairly low. The main things, again, this ties in with our Generation Z research as well, it's all around the value that they're going to achieve from doing an apprenticeship. What do students actually want from their career? You've probably done a lot of research into this, so it's not too different from what you've seen before. 35% working in a field of my choice. That's the main thing that students want. This again ties in with Gen Z research that we've done, which shows that this generation are much more mission-driven than us. They're maybe less selfish. They actually care about the job they're going to do, what impact it has. It's not just salary. Having said that, 25% are interested in the salary, perks, and overall benefits. 20% good career prospects. So again, what happens after that apprenticeship? 12% workplace culture and people. And interestingly, twice as many young women said workplace culture and people as young men. Brand, this little orange one, 6% saying they care about the brand. They don't care about employer brands, they care about the value of the apprenticeship. We asked them what you'd like to do after school. As you'd expect, 48% university, pretty much in line with the percentage that actually go to university. So for us, this showed us that schools are doing a good job of giving university students advice. 13% of students saying they want to go into an apprenticeship from mainstream schools within the survey, 40% within the UTCs. Lord Baker mentioned only 6 or 7% of leavers actually go into an apprenticeship. So we've basically got double the number of students that want to do an apprenticeship that actually end up doing one. For us, we took away that this suggests schools need a lot more assistance from employers in actually getting across to students how you get into an apprenticeship, especially as these are obviously younger students. How do you find information about apprenticeships? So for the students that want to go into an apprenticeship, where did they get their information? School and college, 45% Key Stage 4, 40% Key Stage 5. You might think that's good, that's the leader, but actually that means 60% of students aren't getting advice about apprenticeships from their school. That's the worst one for us. From an employer, 5% of Key Stage 4 students getting advice about apprenticeships from employers, 10% at Key Stage 5. From people that are pioneering the pathways, we think that is quite a telling statistic and shows there could be a lot more done. Personal connections, again, for Key Stage 4 especially. How did you find your apprenticeships? And use the internet, as you'd expect with this generation. 35% at Key Stage 5 use the internet. How easy is it for students to find your apprenticeship opportunities online? And are they on the platforms that they use? So how do students actually want to engage with you? This isn't that revolutionary, to be honest, but it's nice to see that this is true. App or online, it's as you'd expect, this generation want to engage online with you, roughly 50%. But actually, add these up, it's also 50%. So in person or at an event, half students want to engage with you face to face. What we take away from this is, as you all are doing already, but there has to be a dual-pronged strategy. So it has to be that the events you go to then lead into online interactions and keeping in touch with that student. The students that find you online, how do they find your in-person events? Just a small interesting stat here, only 13% prefer to hear about career opportunities through social media. As we'd expect, Generation Z, this generation like to keep their social networking closed, private. They're much more concerned about data privacy than in general, and so they don't want to be bombarded by opportunities necessarily on social media. Consumer-facing brands obviously have a advantage here with students. EY, PwC down in the 30s, 40s. Maybe not that surprising given the industries they work in, but for us this shows that 65% of students don't know what EY do. If you looked at the graduate market, we seriously doubt that would be the case. So where do you think you would come on this chart? For us, this also shows it's still an emerging market. So it's, from our perspective, the graduate market is so competitive nowadays. The school leaver market, there's still a lot of room for growth here. So key takeaways, and again, these are just our observations, but we believe this shows the need for engaging earlier. So students are making the decisions about their career at an earlier stage than you might have thought. Not just that, but obviously the subject choices that they make influences whether they can actually pursue STEM even if they tried to in the future. Students actually do want to engage with you. So they have real concerns around finding relevant experience, about their network especially, and also about relatable role models, which ties in with the confidence piece. So students are not confident about reaching out to employers. They're not confident in their ability or the ability to get grades for STEM subjects. Again, for us, we work with Women in Science and Engineering, WISE, which I'm sure many of you do. It's all about putting relatable role models from their own background in front of them at an early age, allowing them to interact and getting that self-belief that actually they can make it in the same way as someone that's very like them. Schools need support. Careers advisors can't do it, especially with new things like apprenticeships. For them is still very new. Might not be for you, but schools need a lot more support with delivering that advice to students. And how do students want to hear from you? It's both online and in person. So you need a strategy that combines online long-term engagement with the students with in-person events for maximum impact and reach. So those students that you reach at a careers fair, at a Girls Who Can Code, at STEMettes, STEM Ambassador Programme, whatever you're engaged with, how are you then engaging with them over the next few years? It's not just a one-hit impact, it should be continuous.